The quickest path to financial freedom isn't always total debt elimination. When my financial mentor told me this, I thought she was crazy. How could keeping any debt possibly help my financial situation? Fast forward 3 years, I've paid off over $40,000 in consumer debt, doubled my savings rate, and strategically kept one type of debt that's actually accelerating my wealth building. Today, I'm sharing my complete journey and the counterintuitive approach that transformed my financial life. My financial rock bottom. The wake-up call that changed everything. Have you ever felt like you're drowning in debt with no way out? That was me 3 years ago, buried under a mountain of credit card bills and lying awake at night. I'm talking about the kind of financial stress that follows you everywhere. While you're trying to enjoy dinner with friends, during your morning commute, and especially at 3 a.m. when your mind won't stop calculating how many years it'll take to dig yourself out. My rock bottom moment didn't happen suddenly. It was more like a slow-motion car crash that I kept pretending wasn't happening. I had maxed out all 5 of my credit cards. Yes, 5. Every time I'd hit the limit on one, I'd somehow convince myself that opening another one was the solution. Classic financial self-sabotage, right? The numbers were brutal, over $40,000 in consumer debt. But it wasn't just credit cards. I had a personal loan I'd taken out to consolidate debt, which obviously didn't work because I kept spending, and car payments on a vehicle that was way more than I could afford. Altogether, these payments were eating up 65% of my monthly income. Let that sink in. Before I even paid rent or bought groceries, nearly 2/3 of my paycheck was already spoken for. The daily anxiety became unbearable. I started screening all my calls because debt collectors were constantly trying to reach me. That distinctive ring would send my heart racing and my hands shaking. I'd see unknown numbers pop up on my phone and immediately hit decline, knowing full well I was just delaying the inevitable. Mail became the enemy. I'd let envelopes pile up unopened because I couldn't bear to see how much I owed or how many payments I'd missed. Walking to my mailbox felt like walking to my own execution. Sometimes I'd have full-blown anxiety attacks just thinking about checking it. The worst part wasn't even the financial strain. It was what it did to my relationships. I started making excuses to avoid going out with friends because I couldn't afford it, but was too embarrassed to admit it. "I'm not feeling well" became my go-to excuse. When family members would ask how I was doing financially, I'd lie through my teeth. "Everything's great," I'd say with a fake smile, while mentally calculating which bill I could delay paying that month. My partner at the time could sense something was wrong, but I kept insisting everything was fine. The secrecy created this invisible wall between us. We started fighting about small things because the big thing, my financial disaster, was too terrifying to address. Every money conversation became a minefield, and I'd get defensive at the slightest mention of budgeting or expenses. I lived in constant fear of a financial emergency. What if my car broke down? What if I got sick and couldn't work? I had no safety net. I had no emergency fund, not even a single credit card with available credit. I was one unexpected expense away from complete financial ruin, and that knowledge followed me like a shadow. The turning point came on a random Tuesday evening. I was cleaning my apartment and found a stack of unopened mail shoved in my desk drawer. One was a year-end credit card statement I'd been avoiding for weeks. For some reason, maybe curiosity, maybe masochism, I actually opened it. There it was in black and white, $6,200 paid in interest alone that year. Not principal, just interest. Over $6,000 down the drain, with nothing to show for it. I still remember sitting on my living room floor, statement in hand, doing the math over and over because I couldn't believe it. That was 2 months' worth of my salary. Gone. And for what? The privilege of staying in debt? Something clicked in that moment. I realized I was working my butt off just to make banks richer. All those extra hours, all that stress, and what was I doing with my hard-earned money? Handing it over to credit card companies while my actual net worth kept sinking. I had this sudden clarity that if I continued down this path, I'd be working forever just to stay afloat. 65 years old and still making minimum payments on debts from decades earlier. The thought terrified me more than facing my current financial mess. That night, I couldn't sleep, but for once, it wasn't anxiety keeping me awake. It was determination. I grabbed a notebook and started writing down every single debt I had, with interest rates, minimum payments, and total balances. No more hiding from the numbers. It was time to face them head on. And that's when everything changed. I made one crucial decision that completely transformed my relationship with money and set me on the path to becoming debt-free. I'll tell you exactly what that decision was in a minute and why it worked when everything else had failed. What I realized during my financial rock bottom was that the shame and secrecy around my debt situation was actually making everything worse. Each time I hid a bill, avoided a conversation about money, or lied about my financial situation, I was reinforcing this idea that my debt was something shameful that needed to be hidden, even from myself. My turning point wasn't about finding some magical source of income or winning the lottery. It was about committing to total transparency about my finances. First with myself, then with my closest loved ones, and eventually with a wider support network. The moment I dragged all those financial skeletons out of the closet and into the light, they lost some of their power over me. Yes, the numbers were still terrifying, but now they were just numbers. Problems to solve rather than secrets to hide. I created a spreadsheet tracking every debt, interest rate, and payment. I put it on my desktop so I'd see it every day. No more pretending. No more out of sight, out of mind. I started having honest conversations with my partner about our financial situation and future plans. Those conversations were incredibly difficult at first, but they replaced tension with teamwork. This transparency became the foundation of my entire debt-free journey. It kept me accountable, helped me identify spending triggers, and allowed me to celebrate progress rather than hiding in shame. Without this crucial mindset shift, none of the practical strategies I used later would have worked. But before I share my exact debt elimination blueprint and how I wiped out $40,000 in debt, I need to explain the fundamental mindset revolution that made it all possible. You see, I discovered that most debt-free journeys fail not because of math problems, but because of mindset problems. And changing how I thought about debt was the key that unlocked everything else. The mindset revolution, why most debt-free journeys fail. Changing how I thought about debt was just the beginning. What shocked me most wasn't the financial numbers themselves, but the 3 mental traps I'd built around money that kept me financially stuck for years. The research on this is mind-blowing, and it explains exactly why willpower alone never works for lasting financial freedom. Let me be real with you. I tried all the traditional advice. I made spreadsheets. I downloaded budgeting apps. I cut up credit cards, but nothing stuck until I addressed what was happening in my head. See, most debt-free journeys don't fail because of the math. They fail because of psychology. Think about it. When you're in debt, what's your first instinct? For most of us, it's shame and secrecy. We hide our financial reality from others, sometimes even from ourselves. This creates what researchers call the shame cycle. We feel bad about our debt, so we avoid looking at it, which makes the situation worse, increasing our shame. And what do we often do when we feel awful? Spend money to feel better temporarily, digging an even deeper hole. This cycle of avoidance is deadly to your financial progress. When I was avoiding my financial reality, I wasn't just missing payment deadlines, I was reinforcing a narrative that I couldn't handle money problems. Every bill I ignored was a message to my brain saying, "This is too much for you to handle." But here's where things get interesting. The common advice to fix debt problems is usually some version of just cut all spending. It sounds logical on paper, but it completely ignores how human psychology actually works. This leads us to the first major mindset trap, the all-or-nothing approach. When I first tried to tackle my debt, I went extreme. No eating out, no new clothes, no fun whatsoever. I was going to be a financial monk until every penny was paid off. Can you guess how long that lasted? About 2 weeks. Then I bought takeout one night when I was exhausted, felt like I'd failed, and spiraled into a weekend spending binge because I'd already blown it. This all-or-nothing thinking creates a destructive cycle. Extreme restriction followed by binge spending when the pressure becomes too much. It's actually remarkably similar to crash dieting. We can white-knuckle through deprivation for a while, but eventually, our psychological needs demand attention. The second mindset trap is what financial therapists call magical thinking about future income. This was a big one for me. I kept telling myself, when I get that raise, or when that tax refund comes in, constantly pushing the solution to my problems into some hypothetical future where I'd have more money. This prevented me from taking action in the present moment with the resources I actually had. The third and perhaps most insidious trap was using debt as an emotional crutch. Research shows many of us turn to credit cards when we're feeling stressed, anxious, or dealing with low self-esteem. I definitely did. Bad day at work? Time for some retail therapy. Feeling down? Amazon Prime to the rescue. Credit cards weren't just financial tools for me. They were emotional band-aids. These mental traps create a perfect storm that keeps millions of people stuck in debt despite having decent incomes and access to budgeting tools. The true breakthrough comes when we address the psychology behind our financial behaviors. For me, everything changed when I stopped seeing debt as a moral failure and started treating it as a mathematical problem to solve. This shift was profound. Instead of thinking, I'm bad with money, an identity statement, I started thinking, this particular behavior isn't serving my financial goals, a specific action I could change. Research backs this up. Young adults who develop perceived financial capabilities, believing they can effectively manage money and solve financial problems, show significantly better mental health outcomes than those who don't. It's not just about having money skills, it's about believing you have money skills. I started rebuilding my relationship with money by facing my debt with complete transparency. No more hiding bills. No more avoiding bank statements. No more pretending things were fine when they weren't. This transparency was uncomfortable at first, but it was the foundation for everything that followed. Instead of going to extremes, I created sustainable spending guidelines that included room for occasional treats and social activities. I practiced self-compassion when I made mistakes, rather than using them as excuses to abandon my plan entirely. And I started examining the emotional triggers that led to impulse spending. The most powerful shift, though, was creating what researchers call a debt-free identity, before I was actually debt-free. I started envisioning myself as someone who made smart financial choices, who valued financial security, who could solve money problems effectively. I spoke about money differently. I made decisions differently. I essentially started trying on the mindset of my debt-free future self. This identity shift changed everything, because it transformed debt payoff from punishment to purpose. I wasn't depriving myself anymore. I was aligning my spending with my values and becoming the person I wanted to be. And interestingly, once I made this mindset shift, I started seeing different types of debt through new eyes. Not all debt felt the same anymore. Some debts felt like heavy chains dragging me down, while others seemed potentially useful under the right circumstances. This distinction allowed me to develop a much more nuanced approach to my finances rather than just, all debt is bad. Once I saw debt as a mathematical problem rather than a personal failing, I could evaluate each debt objectively. Did it serve my long-term goals? Was it attached to an appreciating asset? What was the true cost over time? This perspective helped me prioritize which debts to eliminate first and allowed me to view one particular debt in a completely different light. But more on that later. The psychological benefits were immediate, even though the financial payoff took longer. My sleep improved, my relationships improved, my work performance improved. The constant background anxiety of financial disasters slowly faded as I took control of my financial narrative. Of course, mindset alone doesn't pay off debt. You still need practical systems and strategies to make real progress. But the right mindset creates the foundation that makes those practical steps possible and sustainable. My debt elimination blueprint. The system that erased $40,000. Systems beat willpower every time in the debt elimination game. After my mindset shift, I needed practical tools to tackle the actual numbers. What if I told you that finding an extra $400 each month didn't require extreme sacrifice or a second job? My 3-part debt elimination blueprint revealed shocking money leaks that most people never catch. and fixing them was surprisingly painless. When I first decided to tackle my debt, I did what everyone tells you to do. I created an extreme budget that cut out everything enjoyable. Coffee? Gone. Takeout? Eliminated. Entertainment? What's that? I was determined to live up to monk until my debt disappeared. 2 weeks later, I found myself impulse buying $70 worth of takeout after a stressful day at work, feeling like a complete failure. That's when I realized the conventional approach wasn't going to work for me. I needed a system that worked with my psychology, not against it. My breakthrough came when I developed a 3-part system: cash flow optimization, strategic debt prioritization, and automation. This system didn't require perfect willpower. It worked even on my worst days. The first step was cash flow optimization. I had to find money I didn't know I had. The average American household dedicates nearly 12% of their monthly income to debt payments, which meant I needed to understand exactly where every dollar was going before I could redirect it to debt reduction. I challenged myself to track every single dollar for 30 days, no exceptions. I used a simple spreadsheet to record every purchase, from my morning coffee to random Amazon orders. This wasn't about judgment, it was about awareness. What I discovered shocked me. I found nearly $400 in what I call invisible expenses, costs that were quietly draining my bank account without providing real value. There were streaming services I hadn't used in months but was still paying for, an old gym membership I forgot to cancel when I moved, banking fees I could have avoided with a simple account change, magazine subscriptions that automatically renewed year after year. The food waste was particularly eye-opening. I was throwing away about $75 worth of groceries each month because I'd shop without a plan, buy ingredients for complicated recipes I never made, or order takeout instead of using what I had in the fridge. By meal planning and being more intentional about groceries, I immediately freed up cash. Impulse purchases were another silent money drainer. Those just a few dollars Amazon purchases added up to over $100 monthly when I actually tracked them. Simply implementing a 24-hour waiting period for any non-essential purchase dramatically reduced this category. Banking and credit card fees were the final surprise. Between ATM fees, maintenance fees, late payment penalties, and annual credit card fees, I was hemorrhaging money to financial institutions, on top of the interest I was already paying them. A few phone calls to negotiate better terms and switching to fee-free accounts saved me another $45 monthly. With my newly discovered $400, I moved to the second part of my system: strategic debt prioritization. I created what I call a debt dashboard, a comprehensive view of my financial reality that helped me make informed decisions about which debts to tackle first. My debt dashboard wasn't complicated. It was simply a place where I could visualize all my debts together: total amounts, interest rates, minimum payments, and payoff timelines. Before creating this dashboard, my debts existed as separate problems in separate mental categories. Seeing them all together changed my perspective entirely. The dashboard revealed something interesting. Not all my debts were equally destructive. Some were actively preventing me from building wealth, while others had less impact. When I analyzed them objectively, one particular debt stood out from all the others in terms of its devastating financial impact. But I'll explain which one. That was in a moment. A comprehensive financial plan proved essential for effective debt management. I needed to prioritize debt repayment while ensuring I had enough funds for daily expenses and future savings. Without this balance, I'd fall back into using credit cards when unexpected expenses arose. What really transformed my approach was implementing a different budgeting technique. Instead of rigid categories that made me feel deprived and restricted, I created spending windows that gave me flexibility within boundaries. For example, rather than saying, "No eating out ever," I set a weekly food spending window of $75 that covered groceries and dining out. How I spent it was up to me, as long as I stayed within the window. Some weeks I cooked everything at home and had money left over. Other weeks I enjoyed a nice dinner out but cooked simply for the rest of the week. This approach acknowledged that successful debt repayment often involves combining different methods. Just like with the psychological aspects of debt repayment, I found that a hybrid approach worked best for the practical side too. I borrowed elements from both the Snowball method, paying off smallest debts first, and the Avalanche method, focusing on highest interest debts, tailoring the approach to what kept me motivated. I was inspired by a story I read about a couple who paid off $21,000 of credit card debt in less than 2 years. They started with their smallest balance to build momentum and motivation, then transitioned to tackling higher interest debt once they had some quick wins under their belt. The third part of my system, automation, was perhaps the most powerful. I set up automatic transfers to my debt payoff accounts the day after my paycheck hit. I couldn't spend what I didn't see in my checking account. This removed the need for constant decision-making and willpower, which are finite resources. Accountability became a crucial element in my debt repayment process. I created visual debt thermometers for each debt and hung them where I'd see them daily. I celebrated small victories along the way, crossing the halfway point on a credit card, making an extra payment from unexpected income, or dropping below a certain threshold. These celebrations kept me motivated when progress felt slow. The budgeting hack that helped me find extra money wasn't about deprivation. It was about intentionality. Creating spending windows instead of rigid categories gave me the psychological freedom to make choices while still maintaining boundaries. This approach recognized that sustainability matters more than perfection when it comes to long-term financial goals. What surprised me most was how painless many of these changes felt once I implemented them. The $400 I found each month didn't come from giving up everything I enjoyed. It came from eliminating expenses that weren't actually adding value to my life. I wasn't missing those unused subscriptions or wasted groceries. I didn't feel the absence of impulse purchases after the initial habit change. Snowball versus Avalanche, the great debt payoff debate, solved. With $400 in freed up cash each month, I now faced a critical decision that would make or break my debt payoff journey. The financial math said one thing, but my motivation levels screamed something else. And what I discovered by accidentally combining two opposing strategies led to a breakthrough that psychology researchers are just starting to confirm. When you're ready to attack your debt, you immediately face the great debate of the personal finance world. Should you use the debt snowball or the debt avalanche method? Each approach has passionate defenders who act like the other side is financially illiterate. The snowball method is simple. You list all your debts from smallest balance to largest, then focus all your extra money on the smallest debt while making minimum payments on everything else. Once that first debt is gone, you roll that payment into tackling the next smallest debt, creating a snowball effect as your payment power grows. The avalanche method, meanwhile, takes a purely mathematical approach. You rank your debts by interest rate, highest to lowest, and attack the highest interest debt first, regardless of balance. This approach saves you the most money in interest over time. I initially went all in on the avalanche method. It made perfect mathematical sense. Why wouldn't I want to save the most money possible? I created elaborate spreadsheets showing how much interest I'd save compared to the snowball method. The numbers didn't lie. The avalanche would save me over $1,200 in interest payments. But something unexpected happened 3 months in. My highest interest debt was a credit card with a substantial balance, and despite throwing $400 extra at it each month, the balance was shrinking so slowly it felt like I was making no progress. The math said I was winning, but psychologically I was deflating. My debt dashboard showed minimal movement, and I started wondering if this whole debt-free journey was even possible. That's when I accidentally stumbled into a hybrid approach that changed everything. I had a small store credit card with a $780 balance and a personal loan of about $1,200. On a particularly frustrating day, I decided to break the rules of my avalanche plan and eliminate these two small debts completely, just to feel like I was making progress. What happened next surprised me. Knocking out those two small debts in a matter of weeks created an incredible psychological boost. Each time I logged into my accounts and saw paid in full, I got a hit of motivation that renewed my commitment. Those quick wins fundamentally changed how I viewed my debt journey. Suddenly it felt possible, achievable, real. The research actually supports what I stumbled into accidentally. A study found that people using the Snowball method reported significantly higher motivation and satisfaction levels compared to Avalanche users. The psychological benefits of those quick wins often outweigh the potential financial savings of focusing solely on high-interest debts. After those first 2 victories, I created a personalized hybrid strategy. I knocked out my 2 smallest debts using the Snowball method to build momentum, then switched to the Avalanche approach for my larger debts, now that I had the psychological fuel to stay motivated during the longer payoff periods. To visualize my progress, I created what I call debt thermometers, simple visual trackers for each debt that I colored in as the balances decreased. This might sound childish, but there's something incredibly satisfying about watching those thermometers fill up over time. I hung them on my refrigerator where I'd see them daily, creating a constant reminder of my progress. I also built celebration milestones into my plan, not extravagant rewards that would set back my progress, but meaningful ways to acknowledge achievements. When I hit 25% paid off on a large debt, I'd allow myself a simple celebration, a hike to a favorite spot with a special picnic lunch. At 50%, maybe a movie night with friends. These celebrations created positive associations with my debt payoff journey rather than feelings of deprivation. The timeline that emerged from this approach was remarkable. Those first 2 debts were completely gone within 60 days. That early momentum carried me through the next 18 months as I tackled progressively larger debts. Each victory fed into the next, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of motivation and achievement. A personal finance expert I followed emphasized something that resonated deeply with my experience. All debt payoff plans have their own sacrifices and benefits, so it's important to understand what motivates you to keep going. You can also change up your methods as you go along to fit your lifestyle or figure out a whole different repayment plan altogether. That permission to customize my approach was liberating. I wasn't failing at the Avalanche method. I was creating a personalized strategy that accounted for both mathematical efficiency and psychological reality. What I discovered is that the perfect debt payoff method isn't the one that saves the most money or the one that provides the quickest wins. It's the one you'll actually stick with until the end. For most people, that's some form of hybrid approach that balances mathematical efficiency with psychological momentum. As I worked through my debts, I noticed something interesting. One particular debt didn't fit neatly into either category. It wasn't my smallest balance, nor did it have the highest interest rate. Yet something about this debt made me hesitate to prioritize it for early payoff. I couldn't quite put my finger on why, but this particular obligation seemed fundamentally different from my other debts. The hybrid approach taught me that tailoring a repayment strategy to fit my unique financial landscape was crucial for success. When I analyzed my debt objectively, considering both the numbers and my psychological response, I could make better decisions about which debts to target first. One technique that proved particularly effective was tracking my progress visually. Beyond the debt thermometers, I created a weekly chart showing my total debt balance decreasing over time. This bird's-eye view of my progress provided a powerful counter to those discouraging moments when individual debts seemed to be moving too slowly. The effectiveness of my debt repayment plan wasn't just about which debt I paid first. It was about creating a system that maintained my motivation throughout the journey. I discovered that the financial emergency that almost broke me. While celebrating my debt victories felt amazing, nothing tests your financial resilience quite like a $7,000 emergency when you're already stretched thin. The day my car broke down wasn't just about a mechanical failure. It became the ultimate test of everything I thought I knew about managing money and debt. What I didn't realize was how this crisis would force me to confront my deepest financial fears and ultimately strengthen my resolve. I was 6 months into my debt payoff journey, riding high on the momentum of clearing those first few debts, when my trusted car made a sound no vehicle owner ever wants to hear. That grinding metal noise quickly transformed into a mechanic's estimate that made my stomach drop: $7,000 for a complete transmission replacement and related repairs. The timing couldn't have been worse. I had just paid off 2 smaller debts and was making real progress on the larger ones. This car repair bill was nearly double what I'd managed to pay off so far. In an instant, all the confidence I'd built came crashing down. My first instinct? Reach for the credit card. Old habits die hard, and the temptation to slip back into my previous financial patterns was overwhelming. The voice in my head tried to rationalize it. This is an emergency. This is what credit cards are for. You can get back on track later. But I knew that taking on new debt would undo months of progress and, worse, break the promise I'd made to myself. The shame of potentially falling back into old patterns hit me hard. Would I be another statistic, someone who tried to get out of debt but failed at the first major obstacle? I found myself staring at 3 distinct options, each with significant drawbacks. Option 1, use credit cards to cover the repair. This would solve the immediate problem, but add to my debt load and potentially restart the cycle I was working so hard to break. Option 2, drain my emergency fund. I had managed to save about $3,000, nowhere near the recommended 6 to 12 months of expenses that financial experts suggest, but it was something. Using it would leave me with no safety net. Option 3, sell something valuable to cover the expense. I had a few assets I could liquidate, but they were either sentimental or potentially useful for future income. This crisis forced me to make difficult decisions between textbook financial advice and practical reality. According to research, having an emergency fund equivalent to 6 to 12 months of expenses is the recommendation, but like most Americans, I wasn't there yet. My debt payoff plan had taken priority. The situation required me to distinguish between using debt as a tool versus a crutch, a critical distinction I hadn't fully appreciated before. Was taking on new debt in this situation a strategic decision or a relapse into old habits? The Federal Reserve reports that the average American spends nearly 12% of their monthly income on debt payments, and I was determined not to increase that percentage for myself. I ultimately chose a hybrid approach. I used my entire emergency fund, sold my barely used mountain bike, and took on a small amount of new debt through a low-interest personal loan from a family member, someone who understood my journey and offered terms that wouldn't derail my progress. But the real challenge came afterward. With no emergency fund, I felt vulnerable, like walking a financial tightrope without a safety net. According to research, this kind of financial stress can significantly impact mental health, creating a cycle where anxiety leads to poor decisions, which create more debt, which increases anxiety. I made the difficult decision to temporarily pause my debt avalanche. Instead of putting that extra $400 toward my highest interest debt, I redirected it to rebuild my emergency fund. This felt like stepping backward, but I recognized that without this buffer, any future emergency would send me right back to credit cards. The experience taught me something crucial about financial resilience. It's not just about attacking debt aggressively, it's about creating systems that can withstand life's inevitable curveballs. Recent data shows that 72% of caregivers experience financial strain while caring for aging loved ones, and 60% of Americans report that prescription medication costs are a burden. These statistics highlight how common financial emergencies are. They're not a matter of if, but when. This car repair crisis became a defining moment in my financial journey. It forced me to confront whether I was truly committed to changing my financial future or just temporarily behaving better. It revealed that my relationship with debt was more complex than I'd realized. Perhaps most importantly, this emergency helped me distinguish between harmful debts and potentially useful ones. Not all debt is created equal. The high-interest credit card debt that had kept me awake at night was fundamentally different from a strategic, low-interest loan with clear repayment terms. One was a trap. The other could be a tool when used carefully and intentionally. Over the next 3 months, I rebuilt my emergency fund to $5,000. Still not the recommended amount, but enough to handle most common emergencies. I then resumed my debt payoff plan with renewed vigor and a more nuanced understanding of financial resilience. The temporary pause actually strengthened my resolve because it demonstrated that I could face a financial emergency without completely abandoning my principles. The most unexpected outcome? This crisis actually accelerated my debt payoff timeline. The experience of facing a major expense without adequate savings motivated me to find additional ways to increase my income. I started a small side hustle on weekends that brought in an extra $300 monthly, all of which went directly to debt repayment once my emergency fund was rebuilt. In focus groups studying debt management, participants often report that their experiences with debt result in negative side effects like depression, anxiety, and stress. I certainly felt that emotional weight during my car repair crisis. The pressure was intense, and at times it seemed like all my progress was meaningless in the face of this setback. But here's what those studies don't always capture. Financial emergencies can also become clarifying moments that strengthen your financial resolve. What feels like a setback can actually become the catalyst for developing even better financial habits. The hidden mental health cost of debt. Those financial habits helped me stay afloat after the car emergency, but they couldn't address something far more insidious happening beneath the surface. The physical symptoms caught me completely off guard. Racing heart, cold sweats, and panic attacks that seemed to come from nowhere. What my bank statements couldn't show was how my body was keeping a separate, more painful record of my financial stress. Ever notice how your body reacts when you check your bank account after a major purchase? That's not just disappointment, it's your nervous system responding to financial threat. For me, it became constant. My body was in perpetual fight or flight mode, treating each bill like a predator. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding, calculating interest payments in my head. During meetings at work, my mind would drift to my dwindling bank account instead of focusing on the task at hand. What makes financial stress particularly damaging is how it infiltrates every aspect of your life. I started canceling plans with friends because I couldn't afford to go out, but I was too embarrassed to tell them why. My relationships suffered as I became increasingly irritable and withdrawn. Little things that never bothered me before, like my partner buying coffee instead of making it at home, would trigger disproportionate anger. The research on this connection is alarming. Studies show that 1 in 14 people with student loans have experienced suicidal thoughts directly related to their debt burden. This statistic becomes even more troubling when you consider those with lower incomes face even higher rates. Financial distress doesn't just damage your credit score, it fundamentally alters your mental health. I remember sitting in my car one evening after work, gripping the steering wheel as waves of anxiety washed over me. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow. I wasn't having a heart attack. I was experiencing what my therapist later called a financial panic attack. The trigger? A simple email notifying me that my credit card payment was due in 3 days. This might sound dramatic, but the science backs it up. Financial stress creates a biochemical cascade in your body. Cortisol and adrenaline flood your system, your blood pressure rises, and your immune function decreases. Over time, this chronic stress response can lead to everything from digestive issues to cardiovascular problems. My persistent headaches and frequent colds weren't coincidental. They were physical manifestations of my financial anxiety. The vicious cycle became nearly impossible to break. The worse I felt mentally, the harder it became to make sound financial decisions. I'd avoid looking at bills altogether, which only led to late fees and higher interest charges. I'd make impulsive purchases to temporarily boost my mood, then feel crushing guilt afterward. My deteriorating mental health was actively sabotaging my financial recovery. Recognizing this connection was my first step toward healing. I realized I needed to treat my financial wellness as an integral part of my overall health, not as a separate issue. This meant getting support beyond financial advice. I found a therapist who specialized in financial anxiety, and those sessions became as important to my debt journey as my budget spreadsheets. In therapy, I learned practical techniques to manage the physiological symptoms of financial stress. Deep breathing exercises helped calm my nervous system during bill-paying sessions. Mindfulness practices helped me stay present rather than catastrophizing about future financial disasters. These weren't just feel-good techniques, they were essential tools that allowed me to think clearly about money without being hijacked by panic. I also began tracking my stress levels alongside my debt numbers. Every day, I'd rate my financial anxiety on a scale from 1 to 10 and note any triggering events. This simple practice revealed fascinating patterns. Certain debts caused disproportionate stress compared to their actual size. My smallest credit card balance, for instance, caused more anxiety than my larger car loan, likely because the credit card represented impulsive decisions I regretted, while the car was a necessary expense. Building a financial support system proved crucial. I found an online community of people on similar debt-free journeys who understood the emotional component. We'd celebrate financial wins together, no matter how small, and offer encouragement during setbacks. Having people who could relate to both the practical and emotional aspects of debt made me feel less alone. The relationship between my mental health and financial progress wasn't linear. Some days, focusing on my mental well-being meant temporarily pausing aggressive debt payments to rebuild my emotional reserves. Other days, making an extra debt payment was exactly what my anxiety needed. Learning to balance these needs was a delicate dance. I also discovered the importance of self-compassion. The harsh inner critic that berated me for past financial mistakes was actually making my situation worse, not better. Research on financial capability confirms this. Those who approach their finances with self-compassion rather than shame tend to make better long-term decisions. I started practicing what my therapist called financial self-forgiveness, acknowledging past mistakes without letting them define my future. The social withdrawal that often accompanies financial stress can be particularly damaging. I had to find creative ways to maintain relationships without spending money. Coffee dates became walks in the park. Restaurant dinners became potluck gatherings. Not only did these alternatives save money, but they often created more meaningful connections than their expensive counterparts. As I became more open about my financial journey, something unexpected happened. Friends started confiding their own money struggles to me. One admitted she was drowning in medical debt after a hospitalization. Another revealed he was too embarrassed to tell his partner about his credit card balance. The shame and secrecy around financial struggles became painfully clear. We were all suffering in silence, each thinking we were alone. Financial education played a key role in my recovery too. Understanding how debt, interest, and credit actually work helped demystify these concepts and reduce my anxiety about them. Knowledge truly is power when it comes to financial stress. The more I learned, the more control I felt over my situation. As I paid off each debt, I noticed something remarkable. Different debts affected my mental health in dramatically different ways. Eliminating certain high-interest consumer debts created immediate mental relief, like removing a weight I'd been carrying for years. But interestingly, one remaining debt doesn't trigger the same stress response. It's almost as if my body recognizes a difference that my spreadsheets can't capture, a distinction between harmful debt and strategic debt that we'll explore more later. The unexpected benefits of becoming almost debt-free. The distinction my body made between harmful and strategic debt was just the beginning of what would become a total life transformation. What my balance sheets couldn't show was how eliminating those toxic debts would ripple through every aspect of my existence, from my sleep quality to my career negotiations to my closest relationships. The freedom I found wasn't just financial, it was existential. Remember when I said that as I paid off each debt, I noticed certain high-interest consumer debts created immediate mental relief? Well, that was just scratching the surface. What happened next completely blindsided me. Have you ever noticed how much mental bandwidth financial worry consumes? I certainly hadn't, until it suddenly wasn't there anymore. It was like I'd been walking around with background music playing constantly, and someone finally hit the pause button. The mental clarity was almost disorienting at first. This newfound mental space created a fascinating domino effect in my decision-making. Research shows that financial stress significantly impairs our ability to make good decisions, creating a kind of cognitive tax on our brains. Without that constant drain, I found myself approaching problems more creatively and confidently. Take my career, for example. 3 months after eliminating my highest interest debt, I walked into a performance review with my boss with a completely different energy. Instead of desperately needing every dollar of my paycheck, and therefore accepting whatever was offered, I calmly laid out my accomplishments and negotiated for what I actually deserved. The result? A 12% raise and more flexible working conditions. Why? Because I wasn't negotiating from a place of fear anymore. The breathing room in my finances translated directly into confidence in my voice, posture, and requests. My boss later mentioned she was impressed by my new assertiveness. Little did she know it came from knowing I could walk away if needed. But the career benefits went beyond just negotiation skills. That mental bandwidth I mentioned? It allowed me to take on a creative side project I'd been putting off for years, one that now generates additional income and fulfillment. When you're not constantly calculating how to make minimum payments, your mind can finally dream bigger. The relationship improvements, though, those caught me completely off guard. I hadn't realized how much financial stress had been contaminating my closest connections. Studies show that financial stress often leads to tension and conflict in relationships. As my debt decreased, those pressure points in my relationships started healing. My friends noticed I was more present during conversations instead of mentally tallying expenses. I stopped canceling plans due to budget concerns. I could actually listen to their problems instead of comparing them to my own financial worries. One friend actually asked if I'd started meditation because I seemed calmer and more attentive. Even more surprising was how my social circle expanded. I began participating in community events I'd previously avoided due to either cost concerns or simple mental exhaustion. Research confirms this connection. Engagement in social activities correlates with better mental health and can actually buffer against financial stress. The positive feedback loop was remarkable. More social connection led to better mental health, which improved my financial decisions, which reduced stress, which enabled more meaningful connections. My physical health transformed too. The constant cortisol dump from financial stress had been wrecking my sleep, digestion, and even my immune system. As my debt decreased, so did those mysterious headaches and that persistent knot in my stomach. My fitness tracker showed my resting heart rate dropped by 8 beats per minute over 6 months, a change my doctor confirmed was significant. I also started cooking at home more often, not just to save money, though that helped, but because I actually had the mental energy to plan meals and enjoy the process. The improvement in my diet wasn't driven by restriction, but by having the capacity to care for myself properly. Food wasn't just fuel or comfort anymore, it became nourishment. Here's what nobody tells you about paying off debt. The benefits compound in ways your financial spreadsheets can't capture. That 15% interest rate you're eliminating? The real return on that investment includes better sleep, stronger relationships, career advancement, and renewed creativity. Even my decision-making process transformed. Previously, almost every choice came down to immediate cost, from groceries to healthcare to housing. With harmful debt eliminated, I could finally make decisions based on long-term value and alignment with my values. I could ask, is this right for me, instead of just, can I afford this right now? For instance, I'd always wanted to switch to a healthcare plan with better preventive coverage but higher monthly premiums. With financial breathing room, I could make that choice, one that will likely save money and improve my health over the long run. When we're drowning in debt, we're forced into short-term thinking that often costs more in the end. This shift in perspective also revealed something profound about the difference between various types of debt. Not all financial obligations create the same psychological burden. Some debts felt like chains, while others felt more like tools. The credit card debt carrying 22% interest that funded impulse purchases? That was soul-crushing. But the debt that funded my education or helped me weather a genuine emergency? Those carried a different psychological weight. This realization helped me develop a more nuanced understanding of debt, one that went beyond simple good debt, bad debt categorizations. It wasn't just about interest rates or tax advantages. It was about how each obligation affected my mental health, my behavior, and my ability to live according to my values. That's why some financial experts miss the mark when they insist all debt is inherently evil. The research shows that feeling capable of managing your finances, your financial capability, is positively associated with mental health. It's not necessarily the presence of debt itself, but our relationship with it and our sense of control that matters most. Good debt versus bad debt, the critical distinction. That relationship with debt I mentioned? It gets even more interesting when you realize some debts might actually be working for you while others are working against you. What if I told you that the $17.9 trillion Americans collectively owe isn't all created equal, and some of that debt might actually be a strategic wealth-building tool? Let's get something straight right away. Debt isn't just one thing. It's more like a toolbox where some tools help you build wealth and others just punch holes in your financial future. This distinction completely transformed how I approached my debt payoff strategy. The truth is, both extreme viewpoints on debt miss the mark. The all debt is evil crowd ignores how strategic borrowing can actually accelerate wealth building. Meanwhile, the leverage everything enthusiasts often downplay the very real risks and psychological burden that comes with carrying debt. The reality lives somewhere in the middle. Through my journey, I developed a simple framework for evaluating my debts that helped me make much smarter decisions about which ones to attack first and which might actually serve a purpose in my financial plan. It's built on 4 key questions. First, what's the interest rate? This is the most obvious factor, but it matters enormously. When I laid out all my debts, the stark contrast between my credit cards at over 21% interest and other loans at single-digit rates made it clear which ones were bleeding me dry. Second, are there any tax implications? Some debts come with potential tax benefits that effectively lower their true cost. This doesn't make them automatically good, but it's an important part of the full picture. Third, and this is crucial, does this debt fund something that appreciates or depreciates? This question changed everything for me. Borrowing money for something that goes up in value over time is fundamentally different from borrowing for something that loses value or disappears entirely. And finally, does this debt align with my personal values and long-term goals? Numbers matter, but they're not the only thing that matters. Some debts might make mathematical sense, but still keep you up at night with worry. When I applied this framework to my own situation, clear patterns emerged. My credit card debt was the most toxic. High interest rates funding mostly consumable items that disappeared long before the debt did. Every dollar I spent servicing those cards was essentially throwing money into a financial black hole. My car loan was somewhat better, lower interest, but still funding a depreciating asset. Sure, I needed transportation, but a vehicle loses value from the moment you drive it off the lot. This debt wasn't destroying my wealth as aggressively as the credit cards, but it certainly wasn't building anything either. Student loans presented a more complicated picture. The interest rates were relatively low, and the education theoretically increased my earning potential over time. But the return on this investment varies wildly depending on your field of study and career path. For me, they fell into a middle category, not actively harmful, but not necessarily the strategic advantage they're often made out to be. And then there was one debt that looked completely different under this framework, a debt that actually might be helping me build wealth rather than destroying it. But we'll get to that revelation in a moment. This categorization wasn't just an academic exercise. It became the backbone of my entire debt elimination strategy. By understanding which debts were actively harming my financial future versus which ones might actually be working in my favor, I could make much more strategic decisions about where to focus my limited resources. The household debt statistics tell an interesting story here. According to the Federal Reserve, out of the nearly $18 trillion that Americans collectively owe, a whopping 70% is mortgage debt. That's not random. There's a reason why mortgages make up such a large percentage of total debt. Many financially savvy people choose to maintain mortgage debt even when they have the ability to pay it off. Meanwhile, the average household carries over $6,300 in credit card debt, with an average APR above 21%. This is precisely the kind of debt that actively prevents wealth building. high interest payments for items that typically provide no lasting financial value. When I talk to people struggling with debt, I often use a simple analogy. Some debts are like taking poison every month, while others are more like taking medicine that might taste bad, but helps you get healthier in the long run. This distinction explains why even some millionaires strategically maintain certain types of debt while being completely debt-free otherwise. They understand that not all debt is created equal. For me, making peace with this reality was liberating. Rather than seeing all debt as a moral failure, I could evaluate each obligation objectively and make strategic decisions about what to prioritize. This doesn't mean I suddenly became comfortable with high-interest consumer debt. Quite the opposite. I became even more motivated to eliminate the truly toxic debts while developing a more nuanced view of lower-interest, strategic borrowing. The Aspen Institute found that nearly half of people report mostly negative experiences with debt, leading to anxiety and depression. But I wonder how much of that negative experience comes from carrying the wrong kinds of debt rather than debt itself. When every dollar of interest is funding something that improves your financial future rather than diminishing it, the psychological burden feels fundamentally different. My framework led me to prioritize my debts very differently than I might have otherwise. Instead of just looking at interest rates or balances, I considered the complete picture of how each debt was impacting my financial future. 1. High-interest consumer debt that funded disappearing purchases became my top priority to eliminate. These were actively destroying my wealth. 2. Loans for depreciating assets came next. Not as harmful as credit cards, but still not helping build my net worth. 3. And then there were the potentially strategic debts. Low interest, tax-advantaged, and funding appreciating assets or future earning potential. This approach isn't just about math. It's about understanding the role that different types of debt play in your overall financial health. It's the difference between debt that keeps you working forever and debt that might actually help you build wealth faster than you could without it. As I applied this framework, one particular debt stood out from all the others. Unlike my credit cards, which made me feel physically ill when I thought about them, this debt actually seemed to be working in my favor under certain conditions. Could it be that eliminating this debt might actually slow down my journey to financial freedom, rather than accelerate it? The key insight I discovered is that the fundamental difference between good debt and bad debt is whether it helps you build assets or simply funds consumption. Debt that helps you acquire or maintain assets that appreciate over time can potentially be strategic, while debt that funds consumable goods or depreciating assets almost never makes financial sense. This doesn't mean carrying debt is always the right move, even if it funds appreciating assets. The interest rate, your personal risk tolerance, and your specific financial situation all matter enormously. But it does mean that categorically
why I'm
avoiding
proud
all
of my
debt
mortgage
might not be
So
the
remember
optimal
that one
strategy
debt
for
I've been
building
keeping
wealth.
under wraps throughout this entire video? It's finally time for the big reveal, my mortgage. But here's the twist. I'm not just tolerating this debt while I work to eliminate it. I'm actually proud of it. With today's average mortgage rate hovering around 6.51%, my locked-in 2.7% fixed-rate mortgage isn't a burden. It's potentially one of my smartest financial moves. When I first started my debt-free journey, I was convinced that all debt was the enemy. I had visions of making that final mortgage payment and hosting a massive mortgage burning party where I'd literally set fire to my loan documents while dancing around like I just won the lottery. That was the dream, right? But as I dug deeper into the numbers, I realized something that challenged everything I thought I knew about debt. The American mortgage landscape is massive, with total mortgage debt in the United States reaching a staggering $12.5594 trillion. The average household is carrying around $263,180 in mortgage debt. That's a lot of money tied up in homes across America. Yet not all debt carries the same weight. While the average credit card in 2024 charges a punishing 21.59% interest, and even higher at 22.63% for cards actually accruing interest, my 2.7% mortgage is practically a financial unicorn in today's market. This realization forced me to confront an uncomfortable question. What if paying off my mortgage early was actually the wrong move financially? Let me walk you through the math that changed my perspective. If I took the extra money I could put toward my mortgage and invested it instead, the difference in returns is substantial. With average market returns historically ranging between 8 to 10% over the long term, there's a significant gap between my 2.7% mortgage rate and what that money could potentially earn elsewhere. This isn't just theoretical. A 2024 analysis demonstrated that investing the difference between a low mortgage rate like mine and potential market returns could lead to substantially more wealth accumulation over time. We're potentially talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in opportunity cost if I were to aggressively pay down my mortgage instead of investing. Think about it this way. By keeping my 2.7% mortgage, I'm essentially borrowing money at what amounts to a discount in today's financial environment. It's like having access to capital at below market rates. That's not a burden, that's a strategic advantage. Of course, this perspective runs counter to what many financial gurus preach. Dave Ramsey and others in the complete debt elimination camp would argue that the psychological freedom of owning your home outright outweighs any mathematical advantage. And for some people, that peace of mind might indeed be worth more than potential investment returns. But I've found that making this decision requires nuance rather than following a one-size-fits-all approach, which is why I developed 3 critical questions to determine whether a particular debt makes sense to keep or eliminate. First, does this debt fund an appreciating asset? In the case of my mortgage, absolutely. While real estate markets fluctuate, homes have historically appreciated over the long term, making a mortgage fundamentally different from credit card debt that funded last year's vacation, or a car loan for a vehicle that's losing value daily. Second, is the interest rate below what I could reasonably expect to earn by investing elsewhere? With my 2.7% fixed rate compared to historical market returns of 8 to 10%, the math strongly favors keeping the mortgage and investing the difference. Third, does maintaining this debt align with my personal financial values and goals? This is the most subjective question, but equally important. For me, knowing I have locked in such a favorable rate gives me flexibility and financial options that align with my goals of building long-term wealth. What's particularly interesting is that keeping my mortgage doesn't just make mathematical sense. It's actually accelerating my path to financial independence. By freeing up capital that would otherwise be tied up in home equity, I can maintain greater liquidity and investment diversity. Let me be clear though, this strategy isn't right for everyone. If you're uncomfortable with any debt regardless of the terms, or if the psychological weight of a mortgage payment causes you significant stress, the math might be secondary to your well-being. Financial decisions are never purely rational. They're emotional too. Additionally, this approach requires discipline. The strategy only works if you're actually investing the difference rather than spending it. If the extra money that could go toward your mortgage ends up funding impulse purchases or sitting in a low-yield savings account, you'd be better off paying down the mortgage. It's also worth noting that mortgage interest rates matter enormously in this equation. My strategy makes sense with my 2.7% rate, but would be far less compelling at today's average rate of 6.51%. The smaller the gap between your mortgage rate and potential investment returns, the less obvious the advantage. Another consideration is your investment time horizon. This strategy works best when you have many years to ride out market volatility. If you're approaching retirement or need access to your invested funds in the short term, the risk-reward calculation changes significantly. Financial experts who look at the complete picture often recommend that individuals assess their entire financial situation before making decisions about mortgage payoff versus other financial priorities. Your emergency fund, retirement savings, and other financial goals should all factor into the decision. What's been most enlightening about this journey is realizing that true financial freedom isn't about being completely debt-free at all costs. It's about making intentional choices that optimize your resources and align with your values. For some, that might mean paying off every penny of debt as quickly as possible. For others like me, it means strategically using low-cost debt as a tool while eliminating toxic, high-interest obligations. Think of it as graduating from a black and white view of debt to seeing it in full color. Not all debt is created equal, and the context matters enormously. Case studies consistently show that individuals who strategically maintain their mortgage while eliminating higher interest debts often experience improved financial stability and wealth growth compared to those who prioritize mortgage payoff above all else. My approach now focuses on maximizing my overall financial health rather than achieving an arbitrary debt-free label. I've redirected what would have been extra mortgage payments toward maxing out retirement accounts, building a robust emergency fund, and investing in diversified index funds, all while enjoying the stability of my fixed housing payment. Your personal debt freedom plan, beyond the all-or-nothing approach. Maximizing overall financial health rather than chasing arbitrary labels is exactly why personalized debt strategies outperform cookie-cutter approaches. Did you know that 78% of people who abandon their debt payoff plans do so because they're following someone else's rigid system instead of creating a strategy aligned with their own financial psychology and circumstances? Here's the truth. Financial freedom isn't a one-size-fits-all destination. What works perfectly for a finance guru on YouTube might be completely wrong for your unique situation. Too often, we're fed extreme viewpoints. Either all debt is evil and must be eliminated immediately, or debt doesn't matter as long as you can make the minimum payments. But the most effective approach lives in that nuanced middle ground that nobody seems to talk about. Creating a truly personalized debt freedom plan starts with understanding your complete financial picture. This means taking an honest inventory of your total debt, income sources, and regular expenses. This foundational step gives you clarity on where you actually stand financially, not where you wish you were. Without this clear-eyed assessment, you're essentially trying to navigate without a map. The next crucial element is crafting a realistic budget that actually works with your life. I'm not talking about those fantasy budgets where you suddenly pretend you'll never order takeout again. A functional budget should reflect your actual spending patterns while creating space for mindful consumption. This is your financial roadmap that helps track income and expenses, identify potential savings opportunities, and allocate resources toward debt repayment without setting yourself up for failure. Now let's talk about how different life circumstances demand different approaches. Consider someone just starting their career versus someone 5 years from retirement. The early career person might prioritize building emergency savings while making minimum payments on low-interest student loans. Meanwhile, the near retiree might accelerate mortgage payments to ensure they enter retirement debt-free. Both approaches can be equally valid depending on the individual's timeline and goals. Income stability also dramatically shapes your optimal strategy. Someone with a steady, predictable salary can commit to aggressive fixed debt payments. But if you're a freelancer with variable income or work in commission-based sales, you need flexibility in your debt plan. This might mean focusing on building a substantial cash cushion before accelerating debt payments, or creating a system where you allocate a percentage of income rather than a fixed dollar amount. Your values and priorities must also drive your debt strategy. Some people sleep better at night, knowing they're completely debt-free, even if the math suggests investing would be more profitable. Others prefer to maintain some strategic low-interest debt while building investments. Neither approach is inherently wrong. What matters is alignment with your personal financial psychology and goals. Financial literacy plays a huge role in making these decisions effectively. Understanding concepts like compound interest, opportunity cost, and tax implications empowers you to make truly informed choices about your debt rather than following someone else's playbook. This knowledge helps you evaluate which debts are actually harmful and which might serve as useful financial tools under the right circumstances. Let me walk you through a simple framework for creating your personalized debt freedom plan. First, categorize each debt based on both mathematical factors: interest rate, term, tax deductibility, and emotional weight. how much stress it causes you. This dual perspective gives you a more complete picture than just looking at numbers alone. Next, assess your personal financial safety net. Do you have adequate emergency savings to prevent adding new debt if something unexpected happens? Are your insurance coverages sufficient? Without these protections in place, even the most aggressive payoff plan can be derailed by a single emergency. Third, establish clear priorities that make sense for your situation. This means ranking your debts, not just by interest rate or balance, but by how they impact your overall financial health and well-being. For some, eliminating a smaller, high-stress debt first provides the psychological win needed to maintain momentum, even if it's not mathematically optimal. Fourth, build in regular review points to adjust your strategy as life changes. Financial plans aren't set-it-and-forget-it documents. They need to evolve as your circumstances do. Changed jobs, had a baby, received an inheritance? These life events should trigger a reassessment of your debt strategy. Finally, incorporate psychological supports that keep you motivated. This might include visualization techniques, accountability partnerships, or celebration milestones that recognize progress. The most mathematically perfect plan is worthless if you can't stick with it emotionally. Let me give you a concrete example of how this plays out in real life. Consider two people with identical debt loads and incomes, but very different circumstances. Person A is a single parent with 2 kids and minimal family support. Their primary financial values are security and stability. For them, a debt strategy that prioritizes building substantial emergency savings before accelerating debt payoff makes perfect sense, even if it means paying more interest over time. The peace of mind from having that safety net is worth the additional cost. Person B is a young professional with a robust family safety net and strong job security. Their values center around freedom and growth. Their optimal strategy might involve a more aggressive debt payoff approach, combined with beginning investment contributions earlier. The psychological burden of debt outweighs the math of potential investment returns for them. The emotional aspects of debt management cannot be overlooked. Many people face significant anxiety and stress related to their financial situations. Addressing these emotional factors through support systems and education is crucial for sustainable progress. One approach is to create space for regular money dates, scheduled times when you review your progress, celebrate wins, and adjust your plan as needed. This ritual can transform financial management from a source of anxiety into an empowering practice. Regular review and adjustment of your financial plan is essential as circumstances change. Job transitions, unexpected expenses, or shifts in your financial goals all warrant revisiting your debt strategy. This ongoing evaluation ensures your approach remains relevant and effective as your life evolves. Something that gets overlooked in most debt discussions is the importance of building financial resilience alongside debt reduction. This means developing multiple income streams, enhancing marketable skills, and creating flexibility in your budget. These elements protect your debt payoff progress from life's inevitable curveballs. Professional guidance can also play a valuable role in creating your personalized plan. Financial advisors can provide objective analysis and strategies tailored to your specific situation. They bring expertise in navigating complex scenarios and can help you see blind spots in your thinking about debt and overall financial health. The ultimate goal isn't simply becoming debt-free, it's achieving financial well-being. This broader perspective encompasses not just what you owe, but how you earn, save, invest, protect, and use money to create the life you want. Being completely debt-free may or may not be an essential component of that picture for you. As we wrap up this journey together, I have to stress something important. Financial freedom isn't about following rigid rules or checking off arbitrary boxes. What I've learned from my own experience is that making intentional choices aligned with your unique situation is what truly matters. The research confirms this approach. Just look at the FDIC's Money Smart program, which emphasizes there's no one-size-fits-all approach to financial literacy. With only 18% of high schoolers and 26% of college students rating their financial literacy as high, we need personalized strategies more than ever. This isn't just theory. It's playing out in real time as over 3/4 of Americans report cutting back on spending due to economic pressures. They're making intentional decisions based on their specific circumstances, not following someone else's playbook. So where are you in your financial journey? Which debts are you tackling? And have you chosen to keep any strategically?